We're going to start this session today with Jeff Hirschy, who's from the University of Southern Mississippi, and he's going to be talking on sites of trauma and remembrance, the public history and power of hurricane archives and memorials in Mississippi. So I will hand over to you, Jeff, if you want to share your slides.
Okay, let's do this. Let's see this. Hopefully everyone can see my slides.
Yes.
Feel free to throw it up in the chat box if you can't for whatever reason, because I never know if I can actually do this correctly. So thank you for the introduction. My name is Jeff Hirschy. I am an assistant professor in library and information science at the University of Southern Mississippi in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. It's in Southern Mississippi. It's on hurricane. It's in the path of hurricanes and storms and things like that. And so today, what I'm going to talk about are sites of trauma and remembrance, the public history and power of hurricane archives and memorials in Mississippi. So stories have power. We like to tell stories. We all know that person who likes to tell the one story about the one thing, the one time, about the one person, or we all know the person who sits there and says, the fish was this big when it was this big, or something something along those lines. We like to tell stories. Stories are helpful. They help us learn, they help us mourn, they help us remember things, they help us express our emotions. And they also explain things when we don't understand. For example, let's go all the way back in time now to ancient Babylon. The ancient Babylonians believed that there were gods and goddesses and demons related to multiple aspects of their daily lives. One of those aspects was storms. Now, if I sit there and asked however many of us are in here tonight, this morning, this afternoon, whatever time it might be, wherever you might be, how a major storm is formed, you're going to be able to tell. You're going to be able to tell me this happens, and then this happens, and then this merges together. Ta-da, a storm. Well, the ancient Babylonians didn't know that. Their story was that 𝐓𝐢𝐭𝐥𝐞, the storm demon, caused storms. And if 𝐓𝐢𝐭𝐥𝐞 was angry, the storms would be severe. They would cause damage. They would kill people. They would cause crops to fail. But if he was happy, 𝐓𝐢𝐭𝐥𝐞, the storm demon, would provide gentle rains and helpful rains and rains to bring water and things like that. So this is just one example of a story that helps to explain things. So when it comes to disasters, and when it comes to natural disasters like hurricanes and then their aftermaths, stories can be very helpful because they can help people who survived or who maybe survived and lost someone or lost some property. They can be very helpful because they can help explain how people process and remember the traumas associated with each storm. So each hurricane, each disaster. So to look at this, for the sake of this presentation, I'm going to look at hurricane memorials and archives in Mississippi related to Hurricane Katrina. So on that note, let us go on. These are two of my cats. I am that person at an information conference who has to bring cats into the equation. So there's Anya and Rasputin there to guide us through. So before we get to the actual hurricane and its aftermath, let's talk about what is public history and memory a little bit. So you might be sitting there thinking to yourself, I thought there was going to be words here on this slide. What's this? Well, I'm the person that likes cats, and I'm also the person who likes Star Trek. So this is a scene from Star Trek First Contact, where the gentleman on the left, 𝐓𝐢𝐭𝐥𝐿, is the first human inventor of the warp drive, and he meets the first Vulcan, and aliens are real. Aliens are real in this movie. Well, in this movie, for those of you who don't know, the crew of the USS Enterprise under Jean-Luc Picard and company go back in time to try to prevent the Borg, a race of cybernetic creatures, from preventing this launch. So they go back in time, they stop the Borg, but they also meet 𝐓𝐢𝐭𝐥𝐿. To the people of the 24th century, so Picard and his associates, 𝐓𝐢𝐭𝐥𝐿 is one of the greatest men in their history. So think a Mahatma Gandhi, think Nelson Mandela, think Dr. King, think insert historical, think Rosa Parks, think anyone, a famous historical figure, because Cochrane, in the Star Trek universe, invented the warp drive, went faster than the speed of light, and then this flight helped cure the planet of war, disease, famine, racism, and so many other wrongs. Well, they met the actual man, Zefram Cochrane, in this movie. He didn't do this for any of those reasons. He did it because he wanted to make money. He wanted to make money, and then he wanted to buy an island, and then he wanted to move to that island away from Bozeman, Montana, away from the Rocky Mountains, and retire in peace and quiet and comfort. So why am I talking about the movie Star Trek First Contact? I'm talking about it because it serves as the perfect example of what public history and what public memory is. It is the agreed upon story that a society, for the sake of this paper, it is the agreed upon story that a society tells itself to help explain something. So in this case, Zefram Cochrane was this great man. Zefram Cochrane did everything he did because Zefram Cochrane wanted to help people. But that's just the agreed upon story. In actuality, Zefram Cochrane just wanted to make money, retire, drink a beer, and live in peace. In our own universe, here in the United States, here in North America, we can see this in other examples. So this is a picture I took of a lynching memorial in Duluth, Minnesota. About 90 miles south of the Canadian border. In 1920, 3 African-American men were lynched, i.e. hung by a mob and murdered. These men committed no crimes. After their murder, the society kind of just sat there and went, oopsie-daisy, and forgot about it. They closed it down, they forgot about it, they buried the men in a mass grave and moved on. And it wasn't until the 1970s, the 1980s, and the 1990s that this story was actually rediscovered. And it wasn't until 2004 that this memorial was actually built to these 3 men. And thankfully, now in the year 2022, 2021, and 2020, and so on, they actually have a week of remembrance in the month of June where they remember the 3 men, they remember what happened, they work with local indigenous tribes, they work with other groups to make sure that everyone knows about this, and then everyone attempts to learn from this and apply these lessons to the present and the future. So this is another example of public history and public memory. At the beginning, the public history was, what? Huh? This never happened. But eventually it became, this happened and we need to learn from it. So those are the 2 examples of public history and public memory that I wanted to deploy there. There's Gally. There's Gally, my other cat there, showing us how well she can yawn. And so let's talk a little bit, now that we know about a little bit about public history and memory, let's talk about Hurricane Katrina. So for those of you who may not remember, or those of you who may not know, Hurricane Katrina was one of, if the events on the Gulf Coast of the United States, like Pearl Harbor, like the Kennedy assassination, like 9/11, like the COVID pandemic, like so many other things in so many other countries. Everybody knows where they were before, during, and after Hurricane Katrina. A lot of local history books, a lot of world history projects, and one of them that I'm going to talk about later on tonight in this presentation, they very much divide history between BK, before Katrina, and then AK after Katrina, and then AK after Katrina. So this was a hinge point of history. This was a turning point in history. So let's talk a little bit about the actual stats on Hurricane Katrina. So Hurricane Katrina roared ashore, first off, in Louisiana on August 29th, 2005. It was a Category 2 to Category 3 storm. Now, if the rest of my slide was deleted and everything was, none of that existed, it probably would not have caused the damage it caused. Category 2, Category 3 storm, those are going to cause damage, but those are survivable. What caused all the issues with Katrina is the storm surge. So it had Category 2 to Category 3 winds, had Category 2 to Category 3 rain, but it had a Category 5 storm surge. One of the memorials that we're going to look at later on in this presentation shows how that storm surge in Biloxi, Mississippi raised the water level to 22 feet. 22 feet, basically over most buildings in the city, basically over most most of the trees in the city and across the region. So this is why the storm surge was bad. In New Orleans, for example, the 80 to 90% of the city was covered by water for about a month and a half because of this storm surge. And in Louisiana, the storm killed officially over 1,100 people and caused billions of dollars in damage. But in Mississippi, where we're focused on right now, the storm killed over 238 people and caused around $30 billion in damages. So this, like I said, this was a major event. This was a major event. So for those of you who don't know, the Mississippi Gulf Coast is right below the tan dot that is fully on the North American mainland, here. This is a map of Hurricane Katrina, the route and path of Hurricane Katrina. So it affected many places, not just Louisiana and Mississippi, but it affected all the way up into Ohio, Indiana, and Kentucky, where, the region where I'm from originally. So this was a powerful storm that affected many people. So what comes next? Archives and monuments. So you need to remember, there is a fundamental need for people to remember, people to want to be remembered. They want to remember what happened. They want to remember the stories of what happened. They want to remember their lost loved ones. They want to remember their lost property. They want to remember what happened. And this is why I sit there on the screen and I sit there and say stories that they want. There is an underlying human need, an underlying human desire to be remembered. And this is a monument to Hurricane Katrina in Biloxi, Mississippi, on the Mississippi Gulf Coast. And you can see there's a list of the people who perished, a list of the people who are still missing after 17 years. And in this case, there is basically a ball of debris that was in a tree that was found in a tree over 30 feet in the air. So this is here. People can come, people can go. Like in Duluth with their yearly memorials. There's a yearly memorial here every August. Every mid-September, where people come, people remember, people process what happened. We'll get back to this memorial, but for now, let's go to archives. So archives across the state help the state remember what happened. And now in my paper, and for the sake of time, I'm only going to look at the University of Southern Mississippi here, but in my paper, I looked at the University of Southern Mississippi and the Harrison County Library System. The Harrison County is a county that is on the Gulf Coast of the Gulf Coast of Mississippi, and it took a severe amount of damage in Hurricane Katrina. So let's focus on this oral history project. So in the aftermath of Katrina, the University of Southern Mississippi Center for Oral History and Cultural Heritage, which is a part of the institution's McCain Archive, through their Mississippi Oral History Project, they decided to create a Hurricane Katrina Oral History Project. So this is what they did. They went through and they interviewed people. They allowed people to volunteer. They went out and sought people. And you can go to this project. You can go to their website. You can go to this project and you can download video clips. You can download transcripts. You can download pictures that have been donated. And so this is, we've all heard the phrase, perhaps, that talking it out is good. And this is one way the people who lived through this event were able to talk it out, help process their traumas. And like I said on the first slide, make sure that their story is remembered. Because as long as this Oral History Project exists, as long as the university exists, as long as the Center for Oral History and Cultural Heritage exists, these stories will be preserved. These stories will be remembered. Researchers like myself can access them. They're the people who survived Hurricane Katrina, their ancestors, their descendants can access that through them. So these serve as sites of not just processing trauma, but also strongly of remembrance. So that leads me back to monuments. So monuments play the most public role here because monuments are where people come together to remember. Remember what I said 2 slides ago about the monument in Biloxi. This is where people come to remember. They come, they remember, they still process their trauma 16, 17 years after the fact. So this is another memorial in the city of Biloxi. This is the 22-foot high watermark memorial that I was talking to you about. So right to the left of this is this very large tree. And I took this picture by basically craning my neck, and I took this picture of the top of this flagpole. That red mark is the high water mark. That red mark is the high water mark and everything. So still to this day, people can come, people can look, people can see everything. And people can see everything that happened and everything. And I will sit there and say this: when I went to this particular memorial and I was walking around taking pictures, there were people from Biloxi there. And even though it's been 17 years, these people still stopped me and they told me an hour and a half worth of stories about where they were during Katrina, how they survived Katrina, what happened in the aftermath of Katrina. So these are, and I know it's not a scientific sample there, but these are a perfect way of explaining why, even to complete strangers, people are telling their stories. They're telling their stories. They're telling their tales and everything. So to sum everything up, like I said at the beginning of my presentation and throughout my presentation, stories have power, and especially when it comes to natural disasters, especially in the light of climate change and how things are probably going to change for the worse. But here's hoping we fix it in time and lessen as much, lessen the worst damage. But these stories are important because they tell, they tell how people survived, how people overcame, how people remember. And this is why I say stories have power, stories are important, and stories are helpful. So on that note, thank you. Are there any questions, comments, hitting me over the head or anything like that? I will take any and all questions or comments you might have. I'll stop the share here, so Rasputin the cat doesn't distract you there. So I hope everyone found that interesting, and I'll be quiet and allow the floor for questions.
Thanks so much, Jeff. That was really interesting. Did anyone have a question for Jeff? Please feel free to unmute and just ask a question, or you can put it in the chat if anyone's got any questions.
I have more of just like a quick comment. Are you able to hear me?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
I like that you talked about the physical remembrance of monuments, and then the anecdote of hearing people's story and the processing of trauma, even the visual images of the destruction of Katrina. And it just, so I guess my comment is, I think it's interesting that it kind of highlights ways maybe that like those experiences create like new communities of memory too. And that, so it just kind of, each time it sort of becomes part of each listener, and so I like that, especially too with the 𝐓𝐢𝐭𝐥𝐞 analogy, because it's kind of a reminder of the importance of being your own voice. But anyway, so I just wanted to make that comment. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Rory. Just in the interest of time, I'm going to move us on. If anyone does have any more questions for Jeff, I think please put them in the chat. If we've got time at the end, we can maybe revisit that. But yeah, thanks, Jeff. That was really, really interesting. So thank you so much.